So we get to Genesis 14. You have this incident where 5 kings are beat by 4 kings. So what does that tell you about the 4 kings? That they're strong. That's exactly right. The leader of those 4 kings, the primary guy is Kedorlaomer. Okay? All right. So he's kind of like the leader of those 4 kings because when they rebel in the 14th year against Kedorlaomer. Now, when you hear the year 14, what should you do with it? Ask why God tells you that, because he doesn't have to. What does 14 have to do with anything we've done so far? It's times 2 of 7. So rest is in the air somewhere. Okay, that's what your nose is supposed to sense. Rest is somewhere around here. Where is it? Okay? So, Kedorlaomer is rebelled against in the 14th year from these 5 kings. These 5 kings are said, hey, we're sick of being in submission to Kedorlaomer, so we're going to rebel. Now, remember, we didn't spend a lot of time on Genesis 10, hardly any at all, but that doesn't mean Genesis 10 is a waste. And it's in Genesis 10 that you learn where Kedorlaomer is from, where he descended from. And take a guess where that is. It might shock you. He descended ultimately from Shem. What does Shem mean? So what's at play here? Someone seeking to make it's what the fall is. The fall is promoting an alternate name. And anytime any of us sin, that's exactly what we're doing. So Kedorlaomer is from Shem. That means he's connected with name. So he is making a name for himself, okay? And having all these guys be in submission. So he's like another Lamech. Remember? Lamech, 2 wives, powerful, So this is him. Now you also learned some tidbits. You've got bitumen being used. Bitumen is used in this passage for bitumen pits. The last time we saw bitumen being used was with the building of Babel. And so that's another connection that Kedorlaomer is a descendant from the name, and there's bitumen pits where he's fighting, which reminds you of Babel. So all of these things are just telling you, hey, this is another Babel. This is another name erecting exercise, okay? This is what's taking place. So you got 4 kings that beat 5, which means they're powerful 4 kings. And then you have Abram with how many men? 318 fighting men, which probably means that if he's got 318 fighting men, Abram has a big operation going on. You might think of it's like Abram and Sarah just sleeping in a tent by themselves. But if you've got 318 fighting men, you've got an entourage. And that's what Abraham has. So kind of correct your thinking of whatever you thought of Abraham. All right, so he's got 318 fighting men, but that's still a small number in comparison to 4 mighty kings. Okay? So Abram goes, and like Jonathan with his servant armor bearer, goes and beats 20 Philistines because God's with him. Abram goes and he defeats these 4 kings. Okay? Now, he doesn't go alone, and this is also intentional. He goes with these 3 guys named Aner, Ashkol, and Mamre. All right? These are secular guys. They are not Jews. They are from this land. Okay? And they go with him. And this is another sign of people partnering with God's people. They see God's blessing in Abram, and they want to be part of that. That's people coming to church here. And I'm going to see what this is all about when they come in Trinity Fellowship for the first time. That's Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. And they go and they fight with Abram. So these are little pointers to Abram is blessing the world. Okay? Now, Does the narrator of Genesis tell you this story just for this story? Hey, this is an awesome story. 318 guys beat 4 kings. Well, it's got way more to do with just this story, okay? So this is a story for Israel, okay? Because what you'll find in this narrative are several names that have to do with Israel conquering the promised land. And that's really important because this is written primarily for them first and then us. And are they going to want to conquer the promised land? Yes or no? Well, yeah, but no. What do the spies come back? These guys are huge. It's hopeless. The cities are fortified. We're like grasshoppers in their eye. There's no way we can do it. And this narrative is here for that day. Because in 14:1, Goyim is defeated by Israel in Joshua 12:23. Dan is mentioned in 14:14 that Abram chases them as far as Dan. Dan didn't even exist yet. So the narrator's telling you that, and to say, hey, Dan is going to exist because you're going to conquer it. Take hope, Israel. Don't flake out in Numbers 14 like they did. The Salt Sea is mentioned here. That will provide the border for Israel's land. Eshcol is the place where the spies will get the grapes. This was the land of Eshcol. Eshcol was from that land, and his name's mentioned here. He fought with Abram. El-Paran. This is where they fought. These kings won in El-Paran, and this is where Israel fell. So these 4 kings won a battle at El-Paran, and who beat these 4 kings? Abram. So let me just break this down. Okay. 4 kings beat 5. They beat them in El-Paran. Okay? Then Abram beat those guys and drove them out of the land. Are you with me? Okay. Guess where Israel doesn't believe God and gets cursed to 40 years in the wilderness? Their spies are in the realm of El-Paran. So it's as though God is saying, look, you're walking through the area where I already won. Why are you living in defeat? Do you see the theological import of that? Okay, Kadesh is mentioned. These kings won at Kadesh, and this is where Moses will fall. So in this passage, it prepares the way for both Israel and Moses not to fail. And both Israel and Moses fail. Moses fails in Kadesh in Numbers 20. All right, so these are just multiple pointers to the fact that God is paving the way for Israel to go into the wilderness, and Israel flakes out in Numbers 14. Okay? So this is an important passage to catch. All right, then we run into a 2-king comparison. You've got, at the end of this victory, Abram is met by 2 kings. He's met by the king of Sodom, and he's met by another mysterious king named Melchizedek. Okay? So, he's met by 2 kings, and these 2 kings are meant to be compared. Okay? You already have the commonality that they're 2 kings. Okay, so what you have with the king of Sodom, his name is not mentioned. In other words, don't pay attention to him. You don't learn from him. Melchizedek's name is mentioned. All right? You'll run into this in the Exodus. Pharaoh is making a name for himself. Which Pharaoh was it? Nobody knows because the Bible didn't tell you his name, and that's intentional. The book of Exodus is teaching you God's name, not Pharaoh's. This is all intentional. The king of Sodom's name was mentioned at the beginning of this. It's not mentioned here because he wants you to focus on Melchizedek. All right? So this is the opportunity for the king of Sodom to repent before Sodom's destroyed. Do you see that? He just got beat and got saved by God's man. What should he do with Abram? What should Cain have done with Abel? Should he have killed him? Of course not. What should he have done? Hey, Abel, what did you do that I didn't? How do you view God that I don't? He should have learned from Abel. Do you see? Instead of kill him. What am I missing? There's a sense in which Nicodemus, who's a teacher of Israel, going to Jesus, he's going at the night because he doesn't want anybody to know. So that's not good, but at least he's asking him questions and saying, like, clearly you're special. That's a good thing. Does the king of Sodom do that with Abram, who just rescued him? No, he doesn't. So he's not like the kings in Psalm 2 that are supposed to kiss the son. He doesn't kiss the son, okay? His first words to Abram are, give me, and then you take. Melchizedek is referred to in name. His name means king of righteousness. He's from the city of Salem, which is the word for peace, okay? He's described as being a priest of the God Most High. The first mentioning of a priest at this point. So he's both king and priest, which is what Adam's job was, to have dominion and also to reconcile all the earth in the glory of God. So Melchizedek is like an Adam. And then you've got, instead of him going out to meet Abram, like the king of Sodom did, he went out to talk to Abram. The Melchizedek comes to bring blessing to Abram, and he brings bread and wine, which is a meal of victory, okay? And we'll see this in the Lord's Supper. It's a meal of victory. Okay, so all of these things are pointing and creating a difference between the king of Sodom and Melchizedek. The king of Sodom says, give me. The Melchizedek says, here, take. And so all of these are in very significant comparisons between the two, and it's all looking forward to the victory in Christ, of whom Christ will be a priest according to Melchizedek. Because Christ needs to be a priest, and Melchizedek is a priest, but he's not a priest like Jethro. Some people believe Jethro was saved from the very beginning. I don't think Jethro was saved. He's a priest of Midian, and then he says, now I know that your God is the one true God. So Jethro seems to have a conversion, in my opinion, experience, whereas Melchizedek is priest of God Most High. He is a believer, and Jesus is a priest in line of Melchizedek. Okay, so you've got Lot, who's nesting under the umbrella of the king of Sodom, and Lot gets stolen with the king of Sodom. And so Abram goes and rescues him. Whereas you have Abraham refuses to take a thread or a sandal strap from the king of Sodom. He wants nothing to do with the king of Sodom. Lot's living with the king of Sodom. Abram wants nothing from Sodom. And Abram chooses to pitch his tent with Melchizedek, receiving the bread and wine. You've got, Melchizedek and Abram use similar vocabulary. They both refer to God as the God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And so this is a special arrangement. And as I mentioned with the bread and wine, and then you look forward to the marriage supper of the Lamb. There will be another celebration of bread and wine to come. Okay, let's jump to Genesis 15. You've got Abram, right after this huge victory, God coming to him and saying, fear not, in Genesis 15. Why do you think God would feel the need to come to Abram and say, fear not, with what just happened? Fear of what? From who? That's exactly right. These guys just got their rears handed to them, okay? And they want to come back potentially. And Abram's afraid, you know? He's a relatively small company probably in view of them, so he's afraid of that. And then he also says, "Fear not, I'll be your very great reward." What do you think the great reward has to do with what just happened? What did Abraham just turn down? All the plunder. So God is saying, I will protect you, and what you just turned down, I will be your very great reward. I will make you never miss that. I'll put David prays and says, you put more joy in my heart than when their grain and wine abounds. So God will make Abram's heart glad. He'll be his possession, like the Levites, okay? So I think that's what is going on in this response to Abram. But Abram responds, and he's got, those things were on his mind, but down deep, Abram has something else that he's really concerned about. And what is that? The fact that he doesn't yet have a son. And that Eliezer of Damascus is his closest heir. Which, remember that, Eliezer of Damascus, because when we get to Genesis 24, you'll find that Abram wants a wife for his son Isaac and sends the oldest, most faithful servant in his household. And it doesn't mention his name. Who do you think that is? It's probably Eliezer of Damascus. Now think of this. Guys, just think of the beauty of this, okay? Who's supposed to get all his stuff right now? And he's a big guy, Abram? Eliezer of Damascus. What does he do with Eliezer of Damascus? What's he trying to do? To get a wife for his son Isaac. So Eliezer of Damascus is like John the Baptist in a sense. He is becoming smaller and Isaac is becoming bigger. And he's all about it. He's happy to do it. He's happy to be in Abram's household as Isaac gets bigger and he gets smaller. So it's just a special thing. This Eliezer is a neat guy we'll come to see in Genesis 24. Okay, so he's desirous to have a son. And so God calls him out to look at the stars. And he says, so shall your descendants be. And Abram believes, and it's counted to him as righteousness. Okay? I was just talking to you guys earlier about your assurance of salvation. And that as you act in obedience, you will have greater assurance of salvation. And as you act in disobedience, you'll have less assurance of your salvation. What is the work that God is calling you to do according to Jesus? He says, this is the activity that I'm calling you to do. You know what he says? To believe. That's Jesus' work. So that's the work that produces all the work. It's faith. That's it. Believe in him who he sent. That is your work, Jesus says. It's faith. It's faith. And faith produces works. So the first thing of you doubting your salvation is not what obedient thing do you need to go do that you're not doing. The first act of faith is believing Jesus. And then once that happens, all the works you can imagine will bubble forth. So the work of God is faith, is what it is. And this is what we see Abram do here. He looks up at the stars and he believes. He believes God's word. And the text says that it is credited to him as righteousness. Romans 4 and 5. Let me just read it here. Now, to the one who works, his wages are not counted as a gift, but as his due. And to the one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as righteousness. So, to the one who works, his wages are counted as due. But the one who has faith and doesn't work, one who doesn't work but has faith. His faith is counted as righteousness. And this is what we see happen in Genesis 15. Abraham believes. But the moment he believes and it's credited to him as righteousness, what does he do? He dips back into unbelief. I just, that kind of like blows my mind. That there is this amazing act. It's like he believes. God, I believe what you say is true. I believe it. And the next second he says, but can we have a covenant so that I can know for sure? And God says, yeah, we'll do a covenant. I'm already covenanted to you. That happened in free grace in Genesis 12. But we'll put it in paper if that's what you need. If you need paper, you will do it. You know, in the U.S., this would be like going to a lawyer's office and signing papers. You need to sign papers? We'll sign papers. But it's, my word is true. But we'll do it. Let's do it. So he has him cut the animals. Now, significantly, these five animals will be the animals of the sacrificial system. Okay, so he goes through and look at verse 9. Bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. All of those, whether male or female, will be the five animals that are sacrificed in the sacrificial system. Okay? Now, there are questions that you should have at this point. Why 3 years old? And we already have that answer. What should we think of when we see 3? What's that? Resurrection. That's exactly right. You think day 3. Multiplication, resurrection from the earth. So you got 3 years old all over the place. This is resurrection. God's doing a new thing. He's doing creation here. Okay? This is a symbol of it. And then you've got females being present here. Which a lot of times in the sacrificial system, they're male. And not all the time, but sometimes. And I think the picture here is like Numbers 5 or Eve. You've got a female representation of God's people because they're the bride. That's where I would head with that. Okay? And so these are the animals of the sacrificial system. So here's the thing, guys. Listen. Please catch this. When Israel goes into sacrifice, is it their sacrifices that save them? Okay. The answer is no. All of Israel's sacrifices, because these are the five animals that are in the sacrificial system, every time you sacrifice, you're looking back to the covenant not in Genesis 15, but to the covenant in Genesis 12, which was a free gift. So the sacrifices were a recognition of the gift, not an earning of the gift, not a work of the gift. These sacrifices, picture them as communion. If you miss communion this Sunday, are you in trouble? No, you're not in trouble if you miss communion this Sunday. Why? Because your salvation is not in communion. Your salvation is in what communion represents, which is the free gift of grace in Jesus Christ. So Genesis 15 provides the look at the unconditional covenant that God gives Abram in Genesis 12. So this is, every time you're to look at the sacrificial system, it was to be done in faith. That's what it was. Recognition of God's pledged allegiance to us in his mercy that we didn't deserve and didn't do anything to deserve, because that's what Abraham received. So this is because Abraham is struggling to believe the good news of Genesis 12. That's what this is. So God gives him a token, a symbol of it. Are you guys tracking with that? Okay, so why does Israel do the Passover? To remember their salvation in Exodus 12. Why do they celebrate annually Passover? To remember the salvation. It's not to procure salvation. It's to remember the gift that was given. That's what these are. These are memorial situations, okay? So you've got the 5 sacrificial animals. Then you have, once he splits them in half, you've got these birds of prey that descend upon the animals. And Abraham doesn't want this ritual to get messed up, and so he runs them off. Now, these birds of prey are, it's demonstrated if you look at Isaiah 18:6, you've got that these are probably carrion-eating falcons, which commentator Nahum Sarna recognizes that was an Egyptian god. Horus was a carrion-eating falcon. So, because this is where he tells Abram, your people are going to be in bondage for 400 years. Okay? So then you've got these birds coming down, which probably represent Egypt, that are going to try to disturb God's covenant that he made with Israel. And this is what's kind of humorous. I was telling Josh earlier this week. Just picture Abraham, he's an old guy, running off and scaring all these birds away. Okay? What is going to stop, truly, the Egyptian falcon from disturbing God's covenant? Is it going to be Abraham running off as an old man trying to scare away these birds? No, it's going to be the mighty hand of God. So anytime you think you can do an awesome work for God, just picture yourself like Abraham chasing off these birds. It's like a joke. God is going to do a really awesome thing in getting those birds to go away. You're a peon. I'm a peon. God, we are involved in a much bigger thing than ourselves and what we're capable of, okay? And so this is what happens. And he chases them off. He puts Abram into a deep sleep. I don't need you, Abram. I'm going to do this all myself. They're going to be in bondage for 400 years. We should think of the number 40 times 10, okay? 40 days of the flood to make a new creation. You should be thinking that. Now, let me ask you, is there anything Israel did that necessitated them going to Egypt? Like, that seems to kind of come out of nowhere, doesn't it? Okay, this is where we're told Israel is going to go into a nation. It doesn't say Egypt. It just says they're going to be in bondage for 400 years. You're not told it's Egypt yet. Okay. So the question is who is this nation that's going to put them in bondage for 400 years? Okay. And did Israel do anything to deserve it? Or was it just something that happened? Okay. I think we're meant to read. Genesis 15 says you're going to be in bondage for 400 years. Genesis 16 starts, and what happens in Genesis 16? Look at your Bibles. Hagar. And who is Hagar? She's an Egyptian. And the Hebrew points out that as Sarah afflicted Hagar, that is the exact same word for the Egyptians afflicting Israel. So, I believe that Israel went into bondage in Egypt for 400 years as a result of how Abraham and Sarah treated Hagar. Guys, listen, if you think that sounds bonkers, Abraham slept with Hagar and produce Ishmael? And are you watching the news? Like Hamas? Israel? These are Abraham's kids. And it's still happening. One act of sin on Abraham's part has led to Ishmael, who will be like an ass, who's against all his brothers. Now, God can redeem that, and he will, but it still doesn't remove what this one miss of faith leads to. So it's a very big deal. I also believe, and we'll get to this when we get to Jacob, but what does it say about honoring your father and your mother? What's the promise that goes with it? You will live long. Not just you will live long. On the land, you will live long. Did Jacob honor his father? He deceived his father, right? Totally deceived his father. What happens to Jacob after he deceives his father? He leaves the land. Did Jacob live long in the land? Well, he was out of the land for 20 years with Laban, and then he comes back in, but then he goes back out. So I think the reason Israel went to Egypt wasn't just oh, hey, there was a famine. God's people need to leave the land because they're in trouble. Does that sound good about God? Hey, go to this land, and I'm going to bless you as soon as you get there. Shoot, I should have done it just a little bit later. This worldwide famine's coming. So I think there's more to be said about why they left. I think it's in relation to Abraham and Sarah's mistreatment of Hagar. Same word that's used for their mistreatment, same word that's used for Egypt mistreating Israel. And I also think it's related to Jacob dishonoring his father, and as a result of that, he does not live long in the land between Laban and Egypt. Okay, so that's a theory. You can accept it or not, but I think that's important to consider. I like that theory way better than God bringing them to the promised land and then a famine comes and has them leave. That seems to me a little bit like, oh, that's kind of weird. You know, specifically when he tells Isaac, do not leave Egypt. Or do not head to Egypt. Okay, so you've got this place. He also points out that the sins of the Amorites is not yet complete. That's also part of it. I don't think these are in competition with each other. I think that they're in synthesis with each other. But someone could say, well, no, God says it's because of the sins of the Amorites. It has nothing to do with Abraham and Sarah or Jacob. And you could be right. I just think it does based on some other passages. Okay, so then you've got a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch pass through. And this should remind you of what? Where do we see fire? Represent of God in Eden. And then where will we see smoke and fire very shortly? In Exodus, atop Mount Sinai and the burning bush with Moses. So this is happening here. We'll see it in the tabernacle as well. Okay, and so you've got darkness come over, and this fire passes through the beasts. And then if we fast forward and look to Christ, when Christ is entering the crucifixion, what does he say? This is the hour of the power of darkness. And then when he's on the cross, what happens to the land? Darkness comes over the land. Remember when he's being crucified? So this is Genesis 15 being fulfilled. And then these animals were cut in half. Is Jesus cut in half? He's not cut in half, but what happens to him? At his half, he's pierced. And so this is a touching of all of these things. Remember all the dots on the screen. Everything some way, somehow intersects with Jesus. And that's what we see there. Okay? All right. So this is the covenant. God gives it to him. It's as sure as possible. It's going to happen. And then we enter into Abram's fall. Just like Noah had a fall, just like Adam had a fall, now we see Abram have a fall. It doesn't mean he's not a believer. It means that he's a dumb believer sometimes, like we can be, okay? So what does he do? Well, you see the fall resurfacing here because it says that Sarah, now in Sarah's defense, it has been 10 years since they've been in the land and she's still not having babies. And guys, listen, I shared with you at lunch, that Becky and I waited a while to have kids, and then when we started trying to have kids, it didn't happen fast. And listen, when you're trying to have a kid and it doesn't happen, every month every cycle that your wife has is painful, more painful than before, because you're like, it didn't happen again. It didn't happen again. It didn't happen again. And Sarah had been experiencing that all her life. Now she's even postmenopausal, so she's not having cycles anymore. But she's still, they're not having children. When is this baby going to come? It's been 10 years since the call. And so she says, well, God just renewed this promise. Maybe it's supposed to come through a surrogate. And so and this is where it gets back to fall language. She took Hagar, she gave to Abram, and he went into her. And remember, I told you that when you see people sin in Genesis, it tends to happen like animals. Like fast succession, beastly things. Took, gave, went in. That's how it runs as you read it. And so this is big trouble. Remember, Abraham just experienced glory of covenant, and now he's exposing what? In a sexual situation, his flesh. So again, you see this flesh concept happen time and time again when people sin. What should Abram have done? Well, he should have stayed asleep. He should have lived in a state of rest and not woke up, figuratively speaking, okay? And then it continues with the fall concept. Sarah, what motivates Sarah to do this? She says, the Lord has prevented me from having a child. Is God for her or against her in her mind? Against. Just like Eve said, we can't touch it. We may eat. Remember how she lessened God's generosity? Well, Sarah is lessening God's generosity. The Lord has prevented me. It's Sarah speaking to Abram like Eve to the serpent. The woman is speaking here. Abram's just in the background like Adam. Sarah's notions are unchallenged, like Adam didn't challenge Eve's missteps. And Abram responds to Sarah's request like Adam responded to Eve in eating the fruit. And then as soon as Abram does it, what does Sarah do? She blames Abram for doing it. So this is the fall. It's just all happening again, okay? All right. So this is not Hagar's fault. It says that Sarah treats her harshly. Same word I mentioned that'll be used for Egyptians treating Israelites harshly in Exodus 1:11. She leaves. She goes on a 70-mile journey. She ends up by a spring, with a spring by the grace of the Lord. And again, a woman is connected with water. This is the angel of the Lord speaking to her. It's probably Jesus. Anytime there's a material person representing God, it's Jesus. And now she's blessed, but Jesus also doesn't mince words as to what her son will be. It's really hard to take this blessing or to take this pronouncement on Hagar and not have some negativity in it. That he will be a wild ass of a man, and he will be against everybody and everybody against him. This is it's true. She is going to have offspring. He'll have 12 princes and the like. But it's still true about what will eventually happen to Ishmael and his descendants. Okay, God gets a new name here from Hagar. And again, we talked about at the beginning of the class, it's just the expansiveness of his character, not character development. Okay, so let's go to Genesis 17. And what happens in Genesis 17 is very important, okay? So check this out. So God has just confirmed covenant with Abraham, okay? He's just confirmed covenant. He's just said, you go to sleep, I'll walk through the beasts, which means that I'll do it all, and if you or me fail, I'll be the one that dies. Okay? Should we be surprised then when Genesis 17 has God saying to Abram, you need to be circumcised. Does that sound like an add-on? It's like, totally free grace. Abraham comes and he's like, yeah, but you also need to do this. What do we think of that? We should be a little bit like an eyebrow raise. Like, God just said, I'll do it all, and now he's telling Abram to do something. Okay? What do you think? Is there anything that's happened in Genesis 15 to 17 that should make God want to have Abram circumcised? Okay, where are you circumcised? I'm not, let's just get down to the basics here. Where are you circumcised? Huh? Down there. We'll go with that. Okay. So you're circumcised down there. Is there anything that Abraham just did down there? Huh? Hagar. Okay. So guys, listen. Catch the concept of circumcision. Abram, I'm giving it to you. Live by faith, not by sight. Don't live by your flesh. Live by faith. Abraham says, I need a covenant. Okay, I'll give you something material so you can live by sight, but I'm going to make you go to sleep when I do it. Okay? Because he still wants him to live by faith. So he puts him to sleep. He cuts covenant. God goes through it. And he's like, okay, live by faith. Abraham lives by faith or flesh. He works to get the covenant. Paul will say that Ishmael is the son of the slave woman. He's the son of the flesh. Isaac is the son of the spirit, because it takes the spirit to resurrect Sarah's womb. She's barren and she's postmenopausal, and the text indicates that they're not sleeping together. Because when we get to Genesis 18 and they say, no, it's you, Sarah, it's not anyone else, it's you. Because Sarah hasn't been told this is her. Only Abram's been told up to this point that he's going to have a son. And this is why Hagar sort of makes sense to Sarah. He never said it was me. It could be Hagar. She doesn't get told specifically it's her till Genesis 18. You'll have a son next year at this time. Okay? So then they go through Hagar, and they live according to the flesh, and he lives according to the flesh down there. So when it comes to Genesis 17, God says, you need to cut the flesh off in the place that you just used it. That's it. That's what circumcision is. Circumcision is God giving an object lesson to his people to not live according to the flesh. That's what it is. It also is in your most intimate region without getting to your heart or your brain, right? And so it's a sign to say, in your most intimate area, you need to have the flesh cut off. That's the concept of circumcision, okay? Now, this gets crazy when you get to the New Testament. Because what is Paul constantly having to battle with the New Testament churches? Specifically, the letter to the Galatians. Circumcision. Guys, just think with me. Why did God give Abraham circumcision? Was it in order to procure the covenant? No, he already gave him the covenant. It was to remind him to live by faith and not by flesh. That's all circumcision was. It was a reminder for you and to your kids, hey, we need to live by faith. We don't need to live by flesh. Okay? So that's what the point of circumcision. All right? So you get to the letter of Galatians. And what is Paul battling? People that are saying the only way you get into the covenant is if you're... Okay, guys, think about this. They took something God gave them to say, don't live according to the flesh. Live by faith. And they turned that very thing into the work of the flesh. Do you see how bonkers that is? And this is what Paul says to that, okay? This is where it gets really crazy. Because in Genesis 17, God says, if you're not circumcised, you will be cut off from the people, okay? Now that can be annihilated. It can mean just you're ended, okay? James Jordan believes that can mean castrated, okay? You'll be cut off, like you won't have any kids. You'll be done for. So think about this, guys, if you can wrap your head around it. It's a complicated thought because the church gets it so jacked up. But think about this. Paul says to the Judaizers in Galatians, I hope that you emasculate yourselves. In other words, God in the Old Testament said, if you're not circumcised, you're cut off. Paul in the New Testament says, if you stress circumcision as the flesh work, you should be cut off. It's just unbelievable. Because what is circumcision about? It's about a circumcision, Paul says, made without hands. It's the circumcision of the Spirit. That what you need is a new heart. You don't need a sculpted down here. You need a new heart. And so this is a huge, huge push to remove the flesh. Don't live according to the flesh. That's what everybody in the flood days were doing. My Spirit will not abide with them because they are flesh. He's not saying they're humans. He's saying they are fleshly. They're beasts. They live like the earth. They're not spiritual. They're not heavenly people. So they need to be gone. Just like Abram's flesh needs to be gone. So does this mean that Abram's not a believer? No. Does this mean that he needed to do this to become a believer? No. It's God's discipline. He's saying, hey, Abram, you're starting to live as though you need to work. And you're exiting day 7. And I'm telling you, you need to stay in day 7. You need to rest. You need to lean into me and stop thinking you need to do something and manipulate the situation to get it to go your way. I will give it. Humble yourself before the Lord, and he will exalt you in due time. That's it. That's all Abram is supposed to do at this point. Okay? Okay. So let's jump into Genesis 18 and 19. Genesis 18 and 19. Okay. So this is where you have, and guys, before I jump in, because this really does get into a bit of a new narrative. Any questions on what we covered so far? Yeah, I remember there was a thing Alistair Roberts talked about, and I can't remember what it was, but there was something with the weaning that was taking place, but there was something to chew on there. Yeah, because I think the ages are significant. Now, one way the ages can be significant in the end is that you get to compare, because remember Jacob says, I lived very few lives and they've been evil. Jacob ends up dying at an earlier age than Abraham and Isaac. And why? Well, it goes back to the promise of obeying your parents. You will live long in the land. Jacob was disobedient to his parents, and he died the youngest of the 3 patriarchs. And he died outside of the land. So I think there's definitely something to chew on there. But yeah, I wish I could remember. I can't. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Check. No, so they have other people be circumcised. Yeah. And otherwise, they are not part of the people. Yeah. And that's significant, that this has always been a world mission. Think of Israel this way. Have you ever seen a wine glass pyramid? Okay, if you haven't, just imagine it. Take wine glasses and you make like a big square and you just keep making layers till you get to the peak of the wine glass pyramid and there's one wine glass, okay? Now imagine that you have a vat of wine high up above this pyramid, okay? And God starts filling that top glass. That top glass is Israel, or was meant to be, okay? This top glass is Israel, and he pours. And David says, my cup overflows. And he pours, and he pours, and he pours. And all of these other nations below it, all these other glasses are nations, okay? This is how Israel was supposed to work. You'll never borrow from anybody, but you'll lend to everybody. Israel's the top glass. And God was going to so heap blessing on them that it would bless all the nations. That was the idea. And was Israel special? Did he choose Israel because they were special to be the top glass? No, Israel was not a nation. He makes them a nation out of Abram, a dead end. And so this was, but they were to bless everyone. Anyone who's interested. Yeah, they're all invited to the table. Okay? Okay, any other questions before we go to 18 and 19? Okay, let's do it. So 18 and 19, I have this together on the screen because there is a comparison here, okay? And I just want you to chew on this comparison. I'm gonna shoot things to you because here's what the narrator's doing. He wants to compare Abram and Lot. Okay, are you with me? Who's he want to compare? Abram and Lot. So, what you have is you have these two passages put right next to each other. Do you ever see, like, play that thing where there's like two pictures and you're meant to see like what's different about the pictures or something, you know? That's what's happening here. That you got two pictures. These angels go visit Abram at his tent, and these angels then go and visit Lot in Sodom. You with me? Okay, so let's compare. Okay. What you'll find if you read these passages, and we just don't have time today to read them both, I'd encourage you to read them when you finish the class, okay? But what you'll find is that they approach Abram in the heat of the day. What does that mean? That the sun is very bright, okay? So Abram's in the day or night, okay? They approach Sodom in the evening. Is Lot living in the light or in the night? He's in the evening. Another commentator says that could also be a hint that the sun's going down for Sodom, so to speak, okay? Like it's in big trouble, all right? So that's what happened. Abram's sitting at the oaks of Mamre when the angels come, and the angel of the Lord is with them, okay? What are oaks supposed to remind us of? Eden. Lot is sitting at the gates of Sodom. Being at the gate is like being at the place where you make decisions. So it's like being an elder in Sodom. Okay? All right. So Abram lifts up his eyes and sees the angels coming. Lot saw them, it says, as they entered. When Abram sees them, he runs to them from the tent door to meet them, and he bows himself to the earth. When Lot sees them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth. Is there any difference between those two things? Abram runs. Should we notice that? The narrator wants you to notice that there is an earnestness in Abram that maybe there's not in Lot. It's just something to consider, okay? Abram, when he talks to them, says, "O Lord." All right? Lot says, "My lords." It's just something to notice. These are just all things you're supposed to see, okay? You make of them what you will. Is there some sort of spiritual awareness that Abram has that Lot doesn't? Lot calls them like men, lords. And Abram notices maybe that there is the Lord there. These are just questions to ask. Now, in Lot's defense, and this is something that's also different between the two, does the angel of the Lord go to Sodom? No. Interestingly, the angel of the Lord goes and visits Abram with his two angels, but he doesn't go to Sodom. He just sends the two angels. Likely that the Lord is not around purity or impurity. Okay? So Lot is right in saying, my lords, because the Lord isn't there. But Abram does seem to notice, he says, oh Lord, which is interesting. He's at the tree, feet washed, and there's food. He uses fine flour, Abram does, which will be used in the sacrificial system, and a tender and good calf. So it's like a very good here. Lot invites them to his house. He has their feet washed. He encourages them to stay the night. They accept Abram's invitation to a meal. Do the angels accept Lot's invitation to his house? No. What do they say? We want to sleep in the square. And he says, no, you can't do that. This is a bad place, right? Okay. So these are some differences. Abraham, you notice, under promises and over delivers. He says, yeah, we'll just get you a little something to eat. And then he gives them just a all-out feast. Okay. Lot gives them a good meal. There's nothing wrong with what Lot does. Okay. And then in each situation, there is activity at the door. Okay. In Abraham's case, the angels are talking about Sarah having a child. And where is Sarah? You remember? She's not with them. She's standing behind the door listening. Remember? Okay. So now you've got Lot with the angels behind a door. And what are the angels saying is about to happen? They pull Lot in because what are they going to do? They're going to destroy the city, okay? And you've got like Lot offering his two daughters to these men. It's like just a really bad situation. But there's a thought to be had that there's fertility behind Sarah's door. She's going to have a child. And the angels are saying behind Lot's door, you need to come in here. We're going to destroy this city. Right? So there's death behind one door, fertility behind another door. Okay? All right. Abraham enters into judgment with God. Remember, they're saying, should we tell him? Because he is going to be the heir of all nations, the leader of all nations. So then this dialogue starts with Abraham and the Lord. Will you destroy the city for 50? And he starts working down. But there's a dialogue. Abraham enters into judgment with God. Whereas Lot has to get yanked out of Sodom because he's so slow to leave. They're about to destroy, and they yank him out in the early morning hours. Okay? As the light is coming up, which I think is significant in like the day of the Lord sort of judgment way. Okay. And then Abram is praying and interceding for Lot. And then I already mentioned the angel of the Lord is present with Abram, but he's absent with Lot. Sarah will bear a child. Sarah will bear a child as a result of this a year later, they say. And what happens to Lot's wife? She's turned to salt. Okay? So do you see all the commonalities and do you see the differences? You guys with me? In Genesis 18 and 19, Alistair Roberts is the one that points all these things out. Now, here's something I think you really ought to see. Turn to Psalm 1. Okay, tell me what you think the author of Psalm 1 is talking about. You ready? Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. Does that sound like anybody we just met? Who journeyed, see in Psalm 1 the progression? Look, I'm walking, then I stop walking, now I'm standing with, and then I pull up a chair. Do you see the progression? That it goes from walking to lingering to sitting. And what did Lot do? He journeyed toward, he pitched his tents as far as, and now he's sitting in the gate. Okay, so I think the author of Psalm 1 is thinking of Lot. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. I think this is talking about Abraham. Because look at what happens to this guy. He is like, what? A tree. Where did you find Abraham? Sitting by the oak. Planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in season. What does Sarah get told? You're going to have fruit. Okay? And its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but they are like chaff that the wind drives away. What happened to Sodom? It got burnt to ash. What happens to ashes? It blows away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment. Guys, if you read that thinking that the judgment was like you're getting judged by God, you're reading it wrong. Standing in judgment means standing in counsel with God. What did Abraham do with the Sodom situation? He stood in counsel with God and tried to talk him down from destroying Sodom. But the way of the wicked will perish. And that's exactly what happens with Sodom. So I think Psalm 1 is a commentary on Genesis 18 and 19. It's like, there's too many familiar things with Lot's slow progression. Psalm 1's walking, standing, sitting. And then Abraham bearing fruit. Lot being judged and blown away with Sodom, even though he'll get out just barely. And then Abraham standing in the counsel of God. Okay? And so Lot becomes the wilderness goat, so to speak, and Abraham is the sacrificial. So now Sarah, she's 90, she's barren, she's postmenopausal, she doesn't believe. Abraham's laughter is a good laughter. He falls on the ground laughing. He's just overjoyed. He can't believe this is too good to be true. It's so funny that this is actually going to happen. So Abraham doesn't get in trouble for his laughter, but Sarah does get in trouble for her laughter, because her laughter was a scoffing, yeah, right? That's laughter, but it's not a good laughter, right? Okay, and you see something very similar in the New Testament with Mary and Zechariah. Zechariah and Mary are both told by Gabriel essentially the same thing. Zechariah and Elizabeth are barren, Mary's a virgin. Both are very unlikely to happen, pregnancies, okay? So Gabriel tells Zechariah, you're going to have a son. Zechariah says, how can this be, since my wife is barren and I'm old? Gabriel says, since you didn't believe, you will be mute until your son is born. You can't speak. He comes to Mary. He says, Mary, you will have a child. She says, how can this be since I'm a virgin? And he answers her. What's the difference? They both ask a very honest question. The answer is that Zechariah's question was a question of faith or unbelief. It was like Sarah's laughter. How can this be? Sarah's like, how can this be? Right? She's in it. She believes it. She just is curious. So that's the difference between the two. Okay. So then we enter into Psalm 19, and you find something very, very interesting going on. Like I said, darkness is turning to light, And I think that has to do with, as the dawn is coming, Jesus talks about judgment coming like the day of the Lord, right? What is day? It's when the sun's shining. What's happening to Sodom? It's coming out of darkness and it's entering into the light of the Lord, which will destroy it. And this is what is coming into play here. And you've got interesting parallels with the flood in the destruction of Sodom. You've got godless sons marrying godly daughters, which, by the way, what number does Abraham get Lot or get God to? Do you remember? What's that? 10. He gets him down to 10, and Abraham stops. Why do you think that might be? Okay, so Abraham, this is his nephew. Lot's his nephew, so he knows him. They probably see each other from time to time, right? Okay, so you've got Lot and his wife, all right? It says that Lot had 2 daughters that were betrothed, okay? So that's 1 daughter, 2 daughters, 1 son-in-law, 2 sons-in-law, okay? They think he's joking. Remember when he says we got to get out of here, which shows you what kind of guy Lot was. So that's also a strike against Lot. All right, and then it says that he has other sons, which means at least how many? At least 2. So now we're at 8, and it says he had other daughters, which is at least, so we're at 10. So Abram looked, and he says, God, Lot, my nephew, he's got a wife. He's got 2 daughters that are engaged. They're both betrothed to their husbands. They've got at least 2 sons. They've got at least 2 daughters. And he stops at 10. So he's hopeful that 10 will be the number that God won't destroy the city. And there's also something to be said for the fact that, is there a concept here that if there are any righteous in the city, God won't destroy it? Okay? And what does that lead to in Jesus? That as a result of one righteous, many are saved. Do you see how that concept's here? That Abraham, his thinking is, if there's a small amount of righteous people, the mass won't be destroyed. So I think you have a concept of Christ at play here in Abraham's prayer. Okay. All right, and so you've got, in the flood's presence, you've got godless sons marrying godly, so quote-unquote godly daughters. Judgment falls, just like the rain fell, this fire is rained down on Sodom. The purpose is removing wicked people. 1 man and his family escape. There's the presence of wine with drunkenness in Lot and his daughters. Now, this is fascinating. So, guys, what did Lot do to try to assuage the men from raping the angels? He came up with an idea. What was it? He's going to give him his daughters. And this is what I'm talking about retributive justice, okay? Who is the one that ends up sleeping with his daughters? Lot. So this is the justice of God, that he who pushes a stone, it will roll back on him. He who digs a pit will fall into it. This is God's sort of justice. I have a good friend who was coming home every day from work and coming into his driveway with his car, and his son would leave his bike in front of the garage door. So he'd have to park the car, get out, move his son's bike, pull into the garage, and shut the garage door. Okay? And this happened like every day. And every day he'd come in and he'd say, hey, you need to move your bike. Stop leaving your bike in front of the garage door. Stop leaving the bike. But his son kept doing it. So he's like, all right. And he felt like God gave him this answer. So he comes home from work. As he expected, the bike's in front of the garage door. So he's like, Ben, I was happy. I wasn't even mad this time. He goes, I got out of my car. He goes, I took his bike and I went to his room where his bed is. I pulled the covers out of his bed and I put the bike in his bed and I covered it up with covers. He says, it was time for my son to go to bed at night. He goes up to his bed. He's all tired and everything. He goes, Dad, my bike's in my bed. And he goes, that's what I feel like every time I'm trying to get in the garage and your bike's in front of me. He never parked in front of the garage again, right? So this is a sense of, what is he doing? He's trying to level justice in the way that God does. And we are called to be sages in learning how to judge a situation and repentance like God does. We'll see Joseph do this amazingly at the end of the book. So this is what's happening here. He is the one that ends up sleeping with his daughters. But just like the flood, there's wine's presence and drunkenness, but there's greater intoxication. Moses got sleepy, fell asleep, and rolled around and got naked. Lot sleeps with his daughters, and it says he had absolutely no idea. So Lot is like just comatose drunk, okay? All right, then you have a similarity to the flood in that there's nakedness involved, of course, and then there's children mishandling a parent's nakedness. The daughters mishandle Lot's nakedness. Then you also have a result of the children being cursed. They will be the Moabites and such, which is from pagan nations like Ham with the Canaanites. And then, his offspring doesn't become good, just like the Canaanites don't become good. All right? But while you have the flood at play, you also have the Passover at play, Lot's Passover. So what sort of bread does he feed the angels? Unleavened bread, like the Passover. The angels are about to level judgment on the city. What does the Passover angel do? Level judgment on Egypt. He was supposed to escape from his home into the hills, likely where Abraham was. This was Lot's moment to reacquaint himself with Abram. Lot is sort of the guy outside of church that's gotten himself in big trouble, hasn't been to church in months, and he's gotten himself in such big trouble, and one of you see your friend that's out there living like a pagan, even though he's a believer, and you're like, hey, now that you're in trouble, come back to the church. But Lot doesn't. He's told to go to the hills, likely where Abram is, but instead he goes back down into the valley, like Egypt, or like Israel wants to return to, back down into Egypt. You tracking with me? And his own wife actually does. She turns toward Sodom and is leveled with the judgment. By the way, it might sound strange that she's turned to salt. I forget which prophet, but the prophet talks about Sodom being leveled with like salt. Salt is mentioned. And so it's not like Lot's wife got a judgment that Sodom didn't get. She probably got judged with the judgment Sodom got, is the idea. I forgot the prophet that says that. Okay, so it's a minority of mistreated people being saved. Lot leaves Sodom in the early morning dawn, like Israel leaves the Red Sea at the early morning dawn. The men are groping around, they're blind at the door, looking for the door, and destroyed there, while Pharaoh's army is exiting the water, and the door is shut of the water, and they're destroyed there. Lot's wife's told not to look back. And the same with Israel, is not meant to look back to Egypt, and they end up dying in the wilderness like Lot's wife dies outside of Sodom. And Lot ends up dying in the wilderness, also like Moses ends up dying in the wilderness. So there's a lot to think about here. So it's super sad. We get to Lot's sad legacy. He ends up going to Zoar. He talks the angels out of going to the hills, and he ends up going to Zoar. But where is Zoar? Well, if we look back to Genesis 14, Zoar is mentioned there, which was a city beat by those kings who Abraham beat. So Lot just got in trouble being in the security of Sodom, and Abraham rescues him out of that trouble. And now he's running to the arms of Zoar that was also beat by those kings. So Lot is continually seeking shelter in that which is not God. And what will Israel do? Over and over and over again. Who do they make alliances with? Pagan nations to stay afloat. When God says, do not ally with anybody other than me. So again, what is Lot? He's like Cain, who is putting his home on the earth and securing it there. Okay? So this is what happens. And we talked about him with his daughters. Okay. And yet, what does Peter call Lot? He calls him righteous. Okay? So how can Lot be called righteous? Is there anything to point to? He says he was distressed by Sodom. I mean, do we see that? We do see that, actually. The angels come. He says, hey, you guys got to come to my house. They say, no, we'll stay in the square. And it says he persuaded them. And then there's a passage in Hebrews 13, be considerate because you could be entertaining angels unaware. All right? You see potentially Abram and Lot both do that. Did Abram know they were angels? He calls them Lord. But did Lot know these guys were angels? Probably not, but he still entertained them in his house, and that was a good thing. He was disgusted by the stuff of Sodom, even though Lot himself had it all messed up with his daughters, about to give them. So Lot is a mess, but there's still a semblance of righteousness. And that's what Peter draws attention to. And so then what happens to Sodom? Well, the day of the Lord happens in Sodom. It turns day. They're destroyed. You learn in Ezekiel 16 that not only was it this awful homosexuality, raping going on, but that widows and orphans were crying out and being oppressed. Ezekiel says servants weren't being paid by their masters. It's this sort of stuff as well going on in Sodom. And then, amazingly, Jesus says it'll be more bearable for Capernaum, or more bearable for Sodom than Capernaum. That Sodom, as wicked as they were, that if you deny Jesus Christ, you're worse than Sodom. So that's a huge thing. And then it's interesting, Judges 20:40 has a very fascinating passage when towns get destroyed. Okay? So it says, but when the signal began to rise out of the city in a column of smoke, the Benjamites looked behind them, and behold, the whole city went up in smoke to heaven. So you get the impression that when cities are burned, they're burned like a sacrifice to God. And the smoke goes up to heaven. And so there's this judgment taking place from God. Okay, let's jump into Genesis 20. And Abraham. Yes? Yeah, guys, it's all this sort of stuff that it's just really good for that stuff to be happening. Because God clearly is doing this stuff in His Word. And we're meant to pick those things up. And what is that? That just happened with Josh. What is that? John Piper, guys I love, he has a saying that I really appreciate. He says, if you rake, you get leaves. If you dig, you get diamonds. And so just that little thing there, it's a discovery of something. And that's why meditating on the law yields these little things that are like these aha moments. Okay? So that's cool. All right, Genesis 20, Abraham has a relapse. This is kind of crazy because what did Sarah just get told? Remember, never read these narratives in isolation. These narratives are connected. Okay? So what does Abram and Sarah just get told? That in a year, she is going to have a child. So what does that mean that Sarah is? Huh? Huh? Not pregnant, because pregnancy is only 9 months. So what's this mean? Abimelech, the seed of the serpent, takes Sarah, or is about to, into his home to do what? Sleep with fertile Sarah. Do you see how bad this is? She can get pregnant at this point. So this is huge, huge jeopardy. And of course he does take her, and God again intervenes because Abraham's plan didn't work out like it didn't work out the last time. But this is the serpent seeking to get his seed into the woman. Okay? But Abimelech says, "What have you done to us?" We should remember when God says to Adam and Eve, "What have you done?" Or to Eve. And so Abraham returns this pathetic excuse. So he's shamefaced. He has a negative view of God. He says that God kind of like forced him into the promised land. So this is not a good response. And then Abimelech gives him more money, commentators say, than a lifetime's work, worth the price of 20 brides, which is just unbelievable. So God continues to bless. Now, some people will say that, some people I really respect will say that it was totally okay for Abraham to lie to Pharaoh, Abimelech, and the like, okay? Now, what do you guys think? Think it's okay? Okay. What do you think about the Hebrew midwives lying to Pharaoh about the women giving birth before they get there? So, okay, so I'm going to pick on you, Gem and Cheese. You're against Abraham and Isaac lying, but when I tell you about the Hebrew midwives, you went, you're okay with one, but not okay with the other? I'm right with you, actually, so I'm picking on you. But yeah, so why do I think it's wrong? Well, first of all, you've got men lying, okay, versus women who I think have less recourse, okay? You've got Abraham receiving direct promises of God. You've got Isaac receiving direct promises of God, of his faithfulness and the like, and they still lie, all right? They're not lying to protect their wives like the Hebrew midwives are lying to protect babies that aren't even theirs. So there's very less self-interest. They're actually lying to protect themselves. Now ultimately they want to protect their wives too, because I think what they would try to say is, I'm the negotiator and she's not up for sale, okay? And they'll try to get out that way. But that's thinking even the best of Abraham and Isaac. At worst, they're just protecting their own skin, okay? And so I put the Hebrew midwives, taking off, Josh? Okay, all right, love you, buddy. And I think the Hebrew midwives are doing something that's very wonderful, and God ends up blessing them for it. But the other side says, well, God blessed Abraham and Isaac. Well, I think God blessed Abraham and Isaac in spite of their sin, and he blessed the Hebrew midwives because of their faith. And you can call me inconsistent all you want, but I think there's a difference. The other thing is that when Abraham and Isaac lie, they always get caught. Did you notice that? They get caught. Do the Hebrew midwives get caught? No. And I think the Hebrew midwives have a much better reason to lie, okay? Because what did the serpent do to Eve? He deceived her. And now she's deceiving the serpent, okay? And so I think there's some differences there. But the good side, the other side could say, well, it's Sarah the one that's lying. You know, she's the deceptor. But I don't know. I don't think Abraham and Isaac look good here. And I think the import for Israel in this, when they see this, is they say, okay, if God could liberate these people, Abraham and Isaac, in their sin and bless them, surely he can liberate us and bless us without sin. So I think that's where I would end up in these passages, because I don't think this looks good on Abraham. So, just case in point, let's just listen to Abraham's response. And you tell me if this makes Abraham look good. Okay. Verse 11 of chapter 20. Abraham said, I did it because I thought there is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. It's kind of like, Abraham, bro, just stop. Just let it, just admit, yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that. You know? Like, I don't know. It's really, and some of my heroes say that Abraham was doing a righteous thing here, but when I read that response, I'm like, he looks awful right now. He does not look praiseworthy. So, anyway, I don't defend Abraham here, but I could be being too hard on the guy. Okay. All right, so let's go to chapter 21. All right, this is the fulfillment, and this is just really special. They have been waiting. See you, Josh. Yeah, my pleasure. They have been waiting 25 years, 10 chapters for this baby, and guess how many verses are dedicated to Isaac's birth? 7. Guys, I'm just telling you, this demonstrates that so much of what God wants out of us is patience. He wants patience out of us. And anytime you want to short circuit what he's doing, stop. Be patient, and God will raise you up in whatever way he wants to. Okay? Patience. 3 times in 21, it says that God's word had been fulfilled as he had said, what he had promised at the very time God had promised him. There's emphasis on both Sarah and Abraham. It says the Lord visited Sarah. The Lord did to Sarah, and Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Who would have said to Abram that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. So God just blesses them, and he will bless all of us in due time in Christ. So wait for that blessing, and don't fast forward it. Okay, what are some commonalities between Isaac and Christ? And this birth of Isaac. So they are both promised sons. There's a period of delay for each, 25 to 30 years to thousands. Unlikely candidates for birth. There's wonder at the news. Their names are symbolic. Isaac means laughter. Jesus means rescue or deliverer. Births occurred at the appointed time. Galatians 4:4 says, in the time that it was appointed, Jesus came to earth. Each birth required a miracle. Mary was a virgin. Sarah was postmenopausal. She stopped dropping eggs, so to speak. And then there's laughter and glory. And so there's commonalities in each. Okay? So we have, as we continue to journey through, we run into Ishmael being separated from Isaac. You find that Ishmael is doing what that bothers Sarah? He's laughing. And so what do you find there? What is Isaac's name? Laughter. And so I think Alistair Roberts is right that Ishmael is presenting a counterfeit laughter, right? Just like Lot lifted up his eyes, and then Abraham lifted up his eyes according to God's design. So you have Sarah and Abram laughing according to God's design, even though Sarah didn't laugh right. But now you have Ishmael laughing, but it's not a good laughter, and he's got to go. He's a counterfeit laughter, and he's got to go. And even though Sarah sends him away, I would argue wrongly, she sends him away with a bad spirit. Abraham goes to the Lord, greatly displeased. He doesn't want to send Ishmael away. And God says, no, listen to Sarah and send him away. All right, he's a counterfeit. He's got to go. He's a dead end. Isaac is a doorway. And again, the angel of the Lord cares for Ishmael and Hagar and reaffirms promises, and that's the deal. But he's still a dead end as far as the promise goes. And so you find that Sarah, even though she did it imperfectly, she protects the seed. She protects Isaac. And you'll find people do this women do this all throughout the Bible. Sarah protects the seed against Ishmael. Rebekah protects the seed against Esau. He was about to get the seed. And Deborah protects the nation in Judges. Jochebed and Miriam protect Moses. So they're protecting the seed from the serpent. Okay? All right. So then you have Abraham sacrifice 2 sons. You're meant to see Abraham send away Ishmael and then sacrifice Isaac. These are 2 sacrifices, which go back to what day? We learned this morning. The Day of Atonement. So there's 2 sacrifices taking place, one in the wilderness, one on the altar, and that is Isaac on the altar. Okay? And they both share commonalities. Abraham rises early in the morning for Ishmael, sending him off, and going to the mountain with Isaac. They both go to desolate places. Ishmael into the wilderness, Isaac on the mountain. They both almost die in those places. They're each spared by the intervention of an angel. The parent is shown the life-saving intervention to preserve the child's life. Hagar's shown water. Abraham showed a ram. And the accounts end with the boys' future lives. So you're meant to see these things together. Okay, there's narrative design there. And then it goes on to a treaty with Abimelech. And these are the nations sort of coming into the fold because they see God's blessing on Abraham. So this is what you can expect in the nations to come. Okay? All right, let's go to 22. So I called Isaac's sacrifice the sacrifice of Abraham because you're told at the very beginning that this was a test for Abraham. God is not going to have him kill his son. But Abraham lived in the world where there was child sacrifice, did he not? So this may have sounded legitimate to Abraham. Abraham actually thought he would kill his son, but he thought he'd be raised back to life, Hebrews tells us. So, he just said goodbye to Ishmael. He goes forth like his very first call in Genesis 12. This call carries no promises with it. There's a stress on the difficulty. He tells him to go from your country, from your people, from your father's household. So this is like another call out of Abraham. Isaac is older now, so he's a lot harder to sacrifice because he knows him. It's 3-day travel. We talked about that. Geographically, he would have seen the mountain from a distance, and then he would have had to climb it. Isaac, the name is said 4 times. Son is said 10 times. He's told to offer a burnt offering. The burnt offering is a complete obliteration of the sacrifice. It would have been a slit throat, the innards removed, burned in its entirety, and absolutely nothing left. Totally consumed by fire. So this is not going to be a fun sacrifice. And Abraham carried the fire and knife in his own hands. And what does that remind us of? The cherubim. Yep. And the priests. Okay. So this is a hard thing that Abram's called to. But Abram also has unblind faith. Up to this point, God has spoken to Abraham 35 times in 100 years. He went to the land that God would show him, and God delivered him there. He's given victory over Lot. After rescuing Lot, he reassures promises. He's introduced to Melchizedek. So there's lots of, he sees Sarah saved from Pharaoh. God's given him the reminders of dust and stars. So there's all kinds of things. Sarah was saved from Abimelech. Isaac was born. So there are a lot of things. Guys, God will never call you to do something that he also doesn't equip you to do. And so as hard as this sacrifice was for Abraham, God had given him enough faith to do it, to the point that Abraham he reasons to himself. He says, if God raised Isaac from the dead of my body, and Sarah's dead body, so to speak, because we're so old, he can raise him from the dead if I kill him. So strong faith in Abraham. And this is what we see. So we see the ram caught in the thicket, which reminds us of the fall. And of course, Jesus says that Abraham saw my day and rejoiced. And I think, when did Abraham see Jesus' day? I think when he saw the ram caught in the thicket. He rejoiced. And Jesus is that ram. So I think that's what we're supposed to catch there. Okay? And then Jesus will be crucified on or near Mount Moriah, which is where this took place. And it's called the Mount of Provision. We see that Christ is pierced. We see he, just like Isaac carries wood, Jesus carries a cross. Just like the ram was caught in the thicket, we see Jesus wear a crown of thorns. And just like the angel of the Lord called, we see angels present at Jesus' resurrection. And so God provided. He provided in Christ. Okay, so at the very end of this chapter, we see Rebekah introduced, which gets us ready for chapter 23. Chapter 24. Chapter 23 is a very short blip on the screen, but it's still important. Sarah and Hebron. So here's the deal, guys. Has Abram got any land for himself right now? No, not an inch. Not an inch of land. Okay? So the first piece of land he gets is a cave to bury Sarah. All right? So this is the first piece of property. But it does have trees on it, it says, which reminds you of Eden. Okay? And so he gets this cave. But he wants to get this cave in writing, so to speak. So he talks to Ephron, I believe the guy's name is, and he says, hey, what do you, I want this land, to bury. He goes, oh, just take it. And Abram's like, no, I want to buy it. He's like, what's 400 shekels between you and me? So he gets out the 400 shekels and he pays him. Okay? 400, 40 times 10, new creation. Okay? So he's got this cave going on, and this is his first piece of property. So you've got death being planted in the ground. You've got Sarah, the mother of Isaac, being planted in the ground, because a cave's like being a dark place like the ground, being buried like a seed, and that's just the beginning of life that's going to flourish in Canaan. Okay? I think that's the way it's meant to be had. But this is a down payment on the land. And what does the Bible say about the Spirit in our lives? That it is that it is the seal. It is like a down payment that ensures what's to come. So the Spirit is like a little piece of God given to us, which ensures that we will have the land with God. Okay? All right. So I think that's important to understand. Then we enter into 24. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this. but we've got Eliezer likely being the one going. And we see that Abram has trained his servant well in faith. And he goes and he finds Rebekah at a well. Women at well should remind us of Eden. And then they go back to Laban's house, and we're introduced to Laban. And here's the idea when you meet Laban. Asaias, come on up here a second. So I'm Laban. Asaias is Eliezer of Damascus. And when Laban comes and sees Eliezer of Damascus, this is kind of what you should imagine Laban doing. You ready? Hey, come on in. What's he looking for? Not weapons, money. That's who Laban is. Okay, you can grab a seat. I should have prepared you for that, right? Okay, so, yeah, Laban, it says he saw the jewelry on her, and then he invited her in, and then when the servant tries to leave, what does Laban do? The same thing he'll try to do with Jacob and Rachel and Leah. Don't leave. Don't leave. Stay. Why? Because he wants to milk them for more money. Laban is a despicable character in the scriptures. Okay, and so you're introduced to Laban, and of course you're going to get more of this to come with Jacob. But they say to Rebekah, what do you want to do? And Rebekah says, I want to go, And so she leaves. And by the way, guys, this is the first time, let me say it this way. Abraham and Sarah both get a lot of attention, okay? Jacob and Leah both get a lot of attention. Isaac and Rebekah kind of gets more attention. Isaac is kind of a downer of the patriarchs. And that's kind of evidenced in this passage because when Rebekah totally blows your mind in what she does for the servants. She waters his all this stuff and then offers him water. And it was hard to do what she did. So I can't remember the total, but the amount of water she carried to do what she did was like, this girl is a superhuman, okay? So Rebekah gets a lot of attention. That's not to say she didn't sin, but she goes and she's coming back with the servant and heading back. And she says, who is that meditating in the field? Okay, which is Isaac. What is Isaac doing? Do you think he's just out there, just meditating? No, he's likely going to the bathroom. He's meditating in the field. So this is like, oh my goodness. Like, who is that guy out in the field? That's Isaac. And she lowers her veil and she goes. So this is how she meets her husband. It's like, oh, geez, you can't imagine a worse first appearance, okay? And that pretty much follows. Isaac is not a guy, of all the patriarchs, he gets the least amount of attention. Now, it doesn't mean, Jacob was a really bad guy, but Isaac is just kind of a meh sort of character, unfortunately. Okay, let's keep going here. So that's Genesis 24. 25, we've got Abraham's legacy. You've got Abraham giving all his possessions to Isaac. He still gives gifts to his other sons because he does remarry, and he gives some gifts to them. But then he sends them off, and he sends them off to the east. So that is like, these are not the guys you want to follow. Watch Isaac. He's the one that's the firstborn, so to speak, gets all the blessing. And then Abraham dies at a ripe old age, according to God's promise, at age 175. Okay? So you got this. So Ishmael gets wrapped up. Isaac is the doorway. By the way, Ishmael, even though he's a dead end, it says that the Lord was with him. The Lord was with Joseph, guys. So it's very possible. I mean, Hagar names God. So it's very possible that Ishmael was a believer. Now, his laughing probably isn't good. because God does send him away. But it's possible that Ishmael was a believer. Okay, you continue. Esau, we get into Rebekah is told, let me see here, let me catch up on where I'm at. Okay, so this is just a way that Isaac is not a great guy. Well, we'll get into that in a little bit. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So Esau is hairy. He's in the wilderness. And he trades his birthright for lentil stew, which is not good. Jacob is presented as a complete man. It says that he was like a quiet man, you know? So you can tend to think of Jacob as like effeminate, but he's not effeminate. Like he wrestles God. He moves the stone on the well when no one else could. Jacob's a hardworking guy. When it says he's a quiet man, you shouldn't think effeminate. It means whole. He was a whole man. Whereas Jacob's like only masculine prime out in the wilderness. Jacob just could do both, is all that means. Okay? But we've already talked a lot about Esau. When Esau does eat the soup, it says Jacob gave it to him. He ate, drank, rose, went his way. Remember how sin happens really fast? Okay. What did the birthright mean? Well, it meant spiritual uniqueness. Firstborn son. It meant position. It meant financial advantage. You're to carry on your father's work. So birthright blessing, you just get all of the above. It's a really big blessing. And oftentimes it's not given to who you would expect it to. Okay? So we're going to keep trucking along here to try to make it through Genesis. So we're in 26. Isaac has a famine. He repeats his father's sin. He lies. He's shamefaced. Abimelech sees him playing with Rebekah. Oh, guys, I'm sorry. That was, yeah, is that right? Wait a minute. Yeah, Isaac and Abimelech. So then Jacob's blessed 100-fold, and Abimelech sends him away, but eventually they end up making a covenant with each other. And in Beersheba, which is 7 wells, which has the 7 circulating again. Now, guys, something I want you to pay attention to, which is just a very subtle verse, but it's Genesis 25:26. Okay, look at that verse. Or, excuse me, 25, verse 6. Okay, is everybody there? This is a huge thing to see. All right, check it out. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Do you guys see that? Chapter 26, verse 5. I'm going to read it again. Because Abraham obeyed my voice, kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. Does that strike you as odd? Gemetres, you're shaking your head yes. Why? Why does that strike you as odd? What? Oh, you never saw it before. Okay. What should strike us as odd about that? Say it. Okay. All right. We're getting there. Okay. That's right. We have not gotten the law yet. That's coming. It hasn't happened yet. So all of your answers have a part of them that are right. Okay? He didn't keep them. It's by faith. And that's the answer. Israel should have read this and say, wait a minute, he didn't even have the law. What did he have? What's the answer? He had faith. Having faith fulfills the law. That's the point. See, one of my favorite, you guys have asked about names of guys I've really enjoyed on the Old Testament. John Sailhammer is a guy that I've really enjoyed. He's with the Lord now, but he believes that the Torah is written to compare two people, Abraham and Moses. Abraham makes it into the land without the law by faith. And Moses is cut from going into the land with the law because he didn't have faith. So it is about what? Faith. That's what it's about. So that's just a really important passage, Abraham's law there. And then the end of the earth is being reached in this covenant with Abimelech. Okay, 27. All right. So you've got Isaac. He's not presented favorably here. It says that his eyes are dim. Just like Sodom is in the dark, just like the men are made blind in Sodom, these things are meant to hint at their spiritual blindness as well. Okay? Isaac's eyes are dim, which means that the narrator is telling you that to tell you a little bit more, not just that he can't see well. I think he's meant to say that he's a little spiritually blind too. Remember, Isaac is not painted very favorably in Genesis, okay? He's spiritually blind. And one of the ways we know that is because he calls Esau in to be blessed. Now, guys, has Rebecca already been told that Isaac is the one, or Jacob's the one that's going to be blessed over Esau? She's been told that already. So let me ask you this question. Did Isaac know that? Huh? Okay, so you think Isaac knew that, and he's just straight up disobeying God? And disobeying God. What's the other option? Huh? That he doesn't know. What would that mean? Both options are very bad. What would that mean? That Rebecca didn't even tell him. So he's living with his wife all these years, and she doesn't tell him like the most massive thing you could possibly tell your husband. So either way, Isaac's bad in this picture. Either he's disobeying God, per what you're saying, for favor of Esau. And why does he favor Esau? No. Bring me the food I like. Guys, like he's like Esau. He's a follow his nose sort of guy. Esau does that with women. He does it with food. He's married Canaanite women. Esau is a follow your nose sort of guy, and Isaac seems to be too. He wants Esau's good food. So that's what he does. Now, when Jacob blesses his kids in Genesis 49, does he have one come or all? All. When Joseph wants his offspring to be blessed by Jacob, does he bring one or all? Huh? Both, Manasseh and Ephraim, right? So what you find is when the dad's about to die, all the boys come. What does Isaac do when he thinks he's about to die? Which, by the way, he's blind about that too because he lives another 20 years. So he's like, I'm about to die. Hey, Esau, get over here. And like 20 years later, happy birthday, Dad. Thank you. So Isaac is not good, okay? But he only calls Esau. He doesn't even call Jacob. So Isaac's he's just not doing well, okay? And so Rebecca overhears, and Rebecca, she takes it into her own hands, which she shouldn't do, but at least she's doing the right thing. But she shouldn't take it into her own hands. And guys, she favors Jacob, and she knows that Jacob's the one to be blessed. But as a result of this, guess what? She tells Jacob after he steals Esau's blessing, she says, go away for a few days and then come back when Esau's anger wears off. Which, is that a good sign about Esau? That means that Esau is kind of like ah! Oh, that smells good. Like, he's just he's just a beast. He's just a beast of a guy. All right, but no, Jacob goes to Laban. He's there for 20 years, and it never says he sees Rebekah again. So Rebekah takes her favored, and she dies before she ever sees him again because she took it into her own hands. Okay? What should she have done? What will Jacob do to Manasseh and Ephraim? Okay? He'll surprise Joseph to such a point that it says that when Jacob did that, Joseph grabbed his hands to switch it because he was upset. He didn't want it to go this way. But Jacob goes, no, my son. This is the way it is, So she should have waited it out. Who knows how Jacob would have gotten it from Esau? Who knows? But I don't think it's good that Rebekah does that, and I think the rest of the story plays that out. Okay? All right. But even so, Isaac has faith, Hebrews tells us, Hebrews 11:20. And how do we know Isaac has faith? Because when Esau comes back, which, by the way, Jacob has to mess up because he dresses like a beast to get it. We've talked about that. But anyway, when Esau comes back and he says, Father, don't you have, what happened? What does Isaac say to him? He says, I blessed. Who is it that was here? And he says, Jacob, and they come to the conclusion it was Jacob. And he says, I blessed him. And he was blessed. In other words, Isaac's like, look, Esau, even though it wasn't the way it was supposed to happen in our minds, that boy's blessed. I felt it. And I can't change it. And the author says, that's faith. That's Isaac's faith. And that's what the author of Hebrews notices about Isaac, that he didn't attempt to change that blessing. He didn't go back. He said, no, it's over. Jacob is blessed. Okay. Now, what's fascinating is that Jacob tries to pursue the blessing 7 times. Blessing is used in this narrative 21 times in its verbal form. But after this, you got to ask the question, was Jacob blessed? Blessed in the way that he wanted to be blessed, because he stole the blessing. As a result of that, he ends up leaving the land with only his cloak and his staff. He's out of the land for 20 years, not being served, but serving Laban for 20 years. And all of this is because God loves Jacob. And so he's bringing him through this disciplinary process to get Jacob out of Jacob. So who does he give Jacob to? And who's Laban? He's a Jacob on steroids. He's a Jacob with a master's degree in being Jacob. He's way better at being Jacob than Jacob is at being Jacob. Okay? So God's like, hey, Jacob, you want to be Jacob? You want to be a heel grabber? Let me introduce you to the master heel grabber. His name's Laban, and you are going to hate who you are. That's what he does. And he gives him to Laban. And so that's what happens. But not before he gives Jacob great blessing, right? He gives him great blessing. And this is what's so sad, and this is where you're still seeing Jacob in Jacob. Because God gives him all this blessing. He sees angels ascending and descending, which, by the way, when Jesus tells Nathanael that he sees him resting under the fig tree, Nathanael's like, you're Christ. And he goes, if you're amazed by that, you'll see upon the Son of Man angels ascending and descending. Which is, I'm Bethel. I'm Bethel, the house of God. Jacob thought Bethel was the house of God. He was really looking for me. I'm where you meet God, is what he was saying to Nathanael. But anyway, so Jacob gets all these promises. And then you know what he does when he wakes up? He says, God, if you will do this, and he recounts the whole promise. All the things that God just told him he'll do. He says, if you'll do these things, I'll give you this. So what's he doing? He's making a deal with God for something God said, I'm going to give you. Do you see how controlling Jacob is? He's such a manipulator. He's constantly trying to finagle it this way. But you know what? God accepts it. And that is the first time we see a vow offering, which will become a huge offering in Israel's history. We'll get to that, okay? But Jacob is supposed to rest. He gets this promise when he's sleeping. He's never, like Abram, he's never supposed to wake up from that dream. He's supposed to just live and rest in the rest of God. But he wakes up and he makes this deal with God. Okay? So Genesis 29, we've got Jacob's discipline begins. And so this is where God begins to do to Jacob what Jacob did to everybody else. So what does he do? He goes, he finds Rachel at a well, women at the well. He finds her, he cries, he kisses her, he loves her, and he goes to Laban, and Laban's so excited to see another offspring of Abraham, because that means mullah. And so he says, oh, happy. And so Jacob starts working for him. After a month, we learn in the text, Laban says, hey, I probably should pay you. So already Laban's taking advantage of Jacob. He's been working an entire month and not getting paid anything, okay? And so Jacob says, I want Rachel, and I'll work 7 years. The average of working for your bride was 3 to 5 years. So Jacob's saying, Rachel is worth double to me. And then he works those 7 years, and they seem like a few days, the author says, because he loved Rachel so much. So now it's his wedding night. And now Jacob is about to get introduced to what he did to Isaac and what he did to his brother Esau. Okay? Think of the commonalities. When does Jacob, on his wedding night, and by the way, it's his wedding night, do you think he's been maybe drinking wine? Okay, they drink wine at weddings. He's probably, drinking wine. Like Isaac was said to have been drinking wine. Now that's just a guess, but it's probably what's going on. So it's evening. Remember how Isaac's eyes were dim? What time of day is it? Evening. It's dim. See, God is replicating exactly what he did to Isaac to himself. So the eyes are dim. It's dark at night. There's a meal. There's a feast. There's a meal at the wedding. There's a feast taking place with Isaac. The deception is parent arranged. Laban arranges the deception just like Rebekah arranged Jacob's deception. The deception involves siblings. The one deceived has chosen with his senses. The one deceived has chosen with his senses. There's implied clothing. The deception was a theft of a sibling. The theft would affect his life for the years to come. So you have all of what Jacob did to Isaac and Esau happen to him. And he wakes up and he says to Laban, what have you done? When he wakes up to Leah. Okay? And you guys, you got to catch what Laban says to him, because it's so perfect of God. Even though Laban is a total scoundrel, Laban says to him, oh, Jacob, the thing is, in our culture, the older comes before the younger. Do you want to talk about a stab in the gut? Because we know, because when Jacob got to Laban, it says that he told him everything. It sounds like he just poured his heart out to Laban, thinking Laban's like good, not realizing that he couldn't pour it out to a worse person. And you know what Laban's response is to Jacob? You and I, we are bone of bone and flesh of flesh. Like, you just wait, buddy. You think you're good at basketball? I'll show you how to slam dunk, okay? I will destroy you in how to trick people. And that's what he says. Oh, Jacob, the thing is, our culture, the Esau's get blessed in our cultures, not the Jacobs. So I'm going to give you Leah. So it is a perfect judgment. on Jacob. And it's only because God loves Jacob. He's getting Jacob out of Jacob. That's what's taking place here. Okay, so his rebuke cuts. It cuts deep. And anytime people say, hey, there's polygamy in the Bible, why don't we have polygamy? Listen, if there's ever a case to show you how awful polygamy is in the Bible, it's Jacob, Rachel, and Leah. It's a mess. So one man, one woman, it's from the beginning. Okay, so then that introduces Leah and Rachel dying to have kids. Okay, so he works another 7 years. I think he did, me personally, I think he did get Rachel right away. I don't think he waited another 7 years to get Rachel. I think he worked 7 years, but he got Rachel like pretty quick, which creates this animosity between Rachel and Leah, because now it's a matter of who's going to have babies, okay? And this is a really cool thing with Leah. This is why Leah is a pretty awesome character in the scripture, in my opinion. She's not as pretty, right? It says that she has eyes like a cow, okay? And Rachel's beautiful in form and in like face, like her shape and form. I can't remember how it says it, but she's curvy and she's gorgeous, okay? Rachel is not so. All right. And so I want you to just see what happens with Leah. So it's recorded that she has 4 sons, okay? 4 sons. And I want you to notice that each son has to do with Jacob. So, is Leah earthly or heavenly? Earthly, okay? So, the first one is Reuben, and it means, look, a son. Who's she saying, look, a son to? Jacob. She wants Jacob's affection, right? But he loves Rachel, not her, okay? So, Reuben doesn't work. Then she has Simeon. Simeon says, the Lord has heard. So, that has God's name invoked, but what does she want Simeon to do? Or Simeon to accomplish? Jacob's affection. Okay? Then she has Levi. Levi means attached, like Leviathan, like a snake wrapped around something. Okay? Who does she want Levi to wrap around her? Jacob. She wants Jacob's affection. Okay? This is where it gets really cool, because the 4th son is named Judah. And Judah means praise. And she says, this time I will praise the Lord. Like, I don't need Jacob's affection. I'm just going to give thanks to God. It's different this time. And what does God do to Judah? He will be the one through whom the Messiah will come. So it's a really cool, special story. But just like Abraham, after a huge moment of faith, descends back into unbelief, so Leah and Rachel descend back into unbelief. And they start bargaining for Jacob and trying to get like super medicinal ways to have babies and all this sort of stuff. It gets really ugly and sordid, but God is still gracious. It's interesting, it says when the Lord saw in chapter 28:31, the girl gets pregnant. But then in 30 verse 1 and 30 verse 9, it says when Rachel saw, when Leah saw. So it's like if they would just live in the sight of God, they don't have anything to worry about. But as soon as they start living according to sight instead of by faith, all kinds of chaos ensues. Okay? And Leah backtracks in this time, which is sad. But God is still gracious and gives them both kids. They both also use their handmaidens to give Jacob kids. And so they end up with these 12 boys. Okay? Rachel says, give me children or I die. And then what happens to her? She dies while she's giving birth. So this is retributive irony, where you dig a pit, you'll fall into it. Be careful what you wish for type stuff, okay? And also, well, I'll get to that in a second. So then Jacob's exodus begins. He gets lots of kids. He wants Laban to send him away. Laban won't send him away, just like he wouldn't send away Abraham's servant. And so God comes to Jacob in a dream and gives him this concept of the speckled goats and how to work all that out. He uses these white almond strip things, and that sticks, and that ends up being blessed by God, and he gets the spotted and speckled goats, the mottled goats, way more than could possibly imagine. And he plunders Laban, like Israel will plunder Egypt, okay? But here's what's fascinating. Guess what the Hebrew word for white is? This is he who laughs last, laughs best moment, okay? The word for Laban, or word for white, is Laban. That's the word for white in Hebrew, Laban. So God uses white bark to rip off white. Do you see that? So Jacob ends up laughing last, okay? And he plunders Laban. But how does Jacob leave? Does he leave like a man or does he leave like a coward? He leaves like a coward because Jacob's still Jacob. Now, Jacob's gotten better. Laban's changed his wages 10 times. Jacob, he's slept outside all night. He's never tried to get money back for a sheep lost or a goat lost. He was a hard worker. So Jacob is coming out of Jacob, but still not. He leaves while Laban is shearing sheep. That's a 3-day exercise. And he leaves secretly. Laban, like Pharaoh, chases him down, chases Jacob down. And God comes to Laban in a dream and says, if you do this, you're a dead man. And so Laban's like, okay. I won't do that, all right? But Laban says to Jacob, why did you steal my gods? And Jacob says, I didn't steal your gods. In fact, whoever stole your gods will die. Well, who stole Laban's gods? Rachel. And she's sitting on them. And when Laban enters the tent, she says, I can't get up because the way of women is upon me, which is kind of a humorous thing because that's, where are Laban's gods? They're sitting under the menstrual cycle of a woman, so to speak, okay? Just like Israel shames Egyptian gods, Laban's gods are shamed. But Jacob's cursed, he curses. Whoever stole your gods will die. And so Rachel dies for 2 reasons. Give me a child or I die. She dies during childbirth. And she dies after Jacob put a curse on her. Because she was the one that stole the gods. So it's a serious thing to do that. But Jacob does get out and he has his exodus from Laban. Okay, so we go into chapter 31. And this is just a continuation where he is freed from Laban. That just is a continuation of Jacob's exodus. We come into chapter 22. Jacob is going back to the land. Now, this is really significant, guys, okay? He's going back to the land, and God, in the dream about the spotted goats, said to him, I am the God of Bethel. I am the God of Bethel, okay? Now, when Jacob had the dream, he sets up a stone at Bethel, and he says, this will be the house of God. And God says, I'll protect you when you're outside of the land, which was a big deal. And God did protect him. Jacob recognized that. And now he's going back to the land. Where should he have gone? Where should he have gone? He talks about this place when he's in Bethel. He should have went back to Bethel. But when he enters the land, he stops at Shechem. He stops, it's like 30 miles before going to Bethel. And do good things happen in Shechem? No. Dinah, his daughter, goes out among the women. These are Canaanite women. These are the women that made Isaac and Rebekah's life horrible because Esau married them. Okay? They're terrible women. And Dinah goes out among those women and she gets raped by the prince of Shechem. Shechem is his name, the prince of Shechem. And so this is awful. Jacob gets the news. And this is where like the brothers handle it, but Jacob seems to take way too far of a back seat, and he just doesn't seem to care. I think that's because it's Leah's daughter, not Rachel's. And so he lets Simeon and Levi handle it, and Simeon and Levi handle it by saying, okay, yeah, we'll make partnership, we'll make covenant with you, but the thing is, you got to be circumcised. Well, Shechem and his father talk in the whole village of being circumcised. So these are grown men, these are you guys circumcising yourselves. You can imagine that you wouldn't be playing ping pong the next day after circumcising, right? You would be laid up for a while. You wouldn't want to move an inch, okay? So they're circumcised, and Simeon and Levi go in and they kill every single guy. And Jacob, being Jacob, says, you've made me a stench to the people here. All Jacob cares about is Jacob. We learn that Dinah is still in Shechem's house, and Jacob hasn't gotten her yet. So it's a total disgrace, a total scandal. And it's for this reason that Levi and Simeon will not have a share in the inheritance. That when you get to Jacob's blessing, they will be divided among the inheritance. And this is exactly what you find. But in both cases, they end redemptively. Because how come Levi doesn't end up having an inheritance? Because what? Because they killed everybody in Exodus 32. They rose with Moses as one man and killed people. So their lack of inheritance becomes God's inheritance. God is their inheritance, which is really cool. Then Simeon, a lot of the Simeonites fall at Baal of Peor, we learn. His number goes, because it was a Simeonite that slept with the woman at Baal of Peor and is killed. And then you learn that a ton of Simeonites were killed in that incident. So his numbers go from like 50,000 to 20,000 or something like that. It's really significant. But then Simeon inculcates with Judah, which is the southern tribes. So in a sense, both Levi and Simeon, even though they're cursed for what they did, they make a repentant turn and do what's right. And they're both blessed in some way, even though they don't have an inheritance like the rest. So that's a pretty cool thing. Okay, so Jacob is on the run. He finds these perimeter angels. You seem to see, angels are perimeter with Eden. They're on the cusp of Eden. They greet him when he re-enters the promised land. So you see these perimeter angels. But then Jacob is about to go into the promised land, and he's about to face Esau. And we've already talked about this, so I'm going to blaze through it. But what does the angel of the Lord do? He renames Jacob Israel. He says, you've lived to fight God, and you won. God, the angel of the Lord obviously lets him win, because all he has to do is touch his hip, and it dislocates his hip. So the angel of the Lord lets him win to demonstrate you stole the blessing. You stole it. That wasn't good, because you're fighting for yourself. You're living according to the flesh. So just like Abraham needs to get circumcised, the heel grabber gets tripped. Do you see that? Jacob will probably walk like this the rest of his life. What does that look like? Somebody that just got tripped. Like the tripper got tripped. His legs dislocated. And I think that this is like Abraham being circumcised. It's a one for one sort of thing. Okay? And so this is what happens. I talked to you guys about it this morning, that he starts out good. He's going to give some stuff to Esau and honor him and respect him. But then when Esau is running towards him, he freaks out. And what does he do? He manipulates. And he plans his camps. Because when he comes into the camp and he finds these angels there, he goes, there's angels here. And then he calls it, I forget, Mahanaim. It's two camps. There's my camp and there's the angelic camp. But then when he hears Esau coming, what does he do to his one camp? He breaks it into two. So now, is God fighting for him? No, he's fighting for himself. Do you see that? He's relying on his own resources instead of the camp of the angels. And so he organizes his troops. Well, who does he send first? Guys, this is just tragic. Who does he send first? Huh? Does he send Rachel or Leah first? Guys, imagine being Leah's kids. Like, you talk about agony, that you just straight up know he would be much happier if we died than Rachel and her kids. Like, that's about as low as it gets. That he just does that stuff. So Jacob's a mess, and he sends Leah and her kids first, and then then Rachel and her kids. And I can't remember. I always forget this fact. If he goes before Leah, I want to say he does, but I cannot remember. He does? Where do you see that? Ah, okay. Where do you read that, Asais? Okay, yes. So that does make me feel better about Jacob. At least he went himself. Okay? So that is better. So that makes me happy about Jacob. Okay. So we've talked about Esau forgiving him, and it's like the face of God. And yes, and guys, I got Dinah out of place. Esau comes before Jacob. Sorry about that. It's after Esau that he goes in the land, and he stops short at Shechem, not before Esau. Okay? All right, number 35. Whoops. Okay. So in 35, he ends up going going to Bethel. Let's see, 35, yeah. He gets to Bethel, and that is a very good thing. And it's a blessing. It's a blessing for him to be there. Whereas in Shechem, you get the distinct idea that he should not be there. And then you have Rachel die, and according to everything we've talked about, and then this is where Reuben gets disinherited, because when Rachel dies, Rachel has her maidservant, and Reuben goes and sleeps with Rachel's maidservant. Okay? And what is Reuben seeking to do? It's what Absalom's seeking to do with David. What is he seeking to do? He's seeking to cut off Jacob's affection for Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, and their kids. So Reuben is the firstborn, and he's saying, I know I'm not going to be the firstborn because I'm the son of Leah. And he's going to prefer Joseph and Benjamin and Rachel and Bilhah's kids. And he's not going to prefer me, and he should prefer me because I'm the firstborn. So what does Reuben do? He takes things into his own hands to get it done. And he sleeps with Bilhah to cut off Jacob's affection. And Jacob finds out about it. And Reuben, he dug the hole, and what happened? He falls into it because he took matters into his own hands. And guys, this is what we see over and over and over again. God establishes rest for Noah. Noah establishes rest his way. I'm going to get drunk and get sleepy. Right? God calls Adam and Eve images of God. They say, we need to do our thing to become images of God. And they notice their nakedness. It's just time and time again. Abraham, you're going to have a son. I'll sleep with Hagar. Everybody. Rebecca, your son Jacob's going to be blessed. Okay, but I'm going to make him blessed. Do you see how everybody exerts their will to get their hope, even if their hope is a godly one, they can't get it themselves. God has to be the one to get it. Okay, so we've got 10 minutes left, and we see in 36 Esau is cut off. His genealogy wraps up, and then he moves on with Isaac's genealogy. Interestingly, Esau has a lot more kids than Isaac, or a lot more kids than Jacob. Esau probably had grandkids before Jacob had any kids. He got married 40 years before Jacob. Okay? And this is something you see. Ishmael will have 12 princes. Isaac will have Jacob and Esau. So a lot of times you see God's people feel hopeless, but God chooses to bless it. It's really beautiful. And then you see the worldly people, very prominent and successful. Lamech's people built cities. And Seth's just sitting there calling on the name of the Lord, So this is something you see over and over again, that it seems like, oh, how's this going to work? Well, it doesn't get any more hopeless than your Messiah lying dead in a grave, right? That seems as hopeless as it can get. But God delights in overcoming the odds of man, okay? All right, but with Esau, he lives 40 years. He's got chiefs and kings. He's very successful, like Ishmael. But his beasts are mentioned as well, so he's still kind of beastish. He moves east. The names of his descendants are all very sensual, like the senses, because he's like an animal. So he's very sensually driven, okay? And I don't have time to read them all to you, but there's a lot of sensual names. James Boyce points that out. Okay. And Edom will turn out to, very sadly, refuse Israel passage in the land, and they'll be in big trouble for that. Esau lives in Seir, which means hairy. So he's just a beast of a dude. Okay, and but you see this turn, and Herod is an Edomite with Jesus. Herod is an Edomite. But then you see those from Idumea listen to Jesus. So you see some turn in Esau in the New Testament, okay? All right, now, we have Joseph and Judah to finish up with, okay? And let's see if we can get this done. All right, so Joseph, clearly Jacob's favored son. He's out with the sons of the maidservants, okay? So are these guys popular or unpopular? The sons of the maidservants. Are they as popular as the kids? No, they're like third and fourth string, okay? And Joseph comes back and gives a bad report about them. The only other time that word bad report is used is when the spies bring back a bad report. So Joseph, as good as he is in the rest of the story as a young guy, he's a little bit of a naive punk, okay? Like, he's got this beautiful garment, and he's coming to tell on the kids that Jacob already doesn't care about. Like, it's like, Joseph, just enjoy your status and move on with life, okay? Leave these poor guys alone. They don't need it any worse than they already have it, okay? But he does. And then that's not enough. He comes out to them. He goes, oh, man, you guys are working in the field. I'm coming from the house. So what's Joseph do all day? It's like, goodness gracious. So he comes, and then he's in the field, and he's like, hey, I got this crazy thing to tell you guys. You're going to love it. I had this dream, and all these sheaves in the field, representative of you, bow down to me. Can you believe that? And they're like, I'm going to kill you, right? And then he says, no, but it gets better. It's not just the land, it's the stars. All of the stars. And mom and dad, the sun and the moon, you guys are all going to bow down to me. And they can't even talk to him, okay? But it says that Jacob held his peace, all right? And that's where you leave it, okay? And so you've got that, and then Joseph is sent by Jacob to go check on his brothers. His brothers see him from a distance, which gives them time to make up some plans, okay? And so he comes out there, and they throw him in a pit. They rip the garment off. They rip the cloak off of him, his robe, and they kill a goat, and they put the kid's blood on it. Reuben is a loser of a guy. He's off doing something and just misses this whole thing and comes back, and he's like, guys, now it's for sure hopeless for me because I'm done for. You sold him. Like, he's already gone. And who is the one that really takes leadership in that moment? Judah is the one that takes leadership. But Judah's just as hard. Now, you could interpret it either way on Judah, because Judah could be trying to avoid killing him. So it's possible that Judah's noble in saying, look, they're going to kill him. I'll at least just get him sold, but he'll be alive. That's one way you can view it. Or you can view it that Judah says, guys, let's not kill him. Let's make some money. Let's sell the guy. All right? So they sell him. They get silver. Now, the Midianites, they're the ones that do it, and they're going into Egypt. And what are they going to Egypt with to trade? Embalming material. Gum. What's the other one? Myrrh, maybe, is the other one? I can't forget. But I know gum, frankincense. I can't remember. But it's embalming material. Okay? And so Egypt is pictured to be a place of death. Joseph is stripped from his robe, and they take the robe, they put blood on it, they send it to Jacob, and they say to Jacob, and they send it by way of a servant, so they're just total losers. And Judah's probably the one that arranged all of this, okay? Because he's rising to prominence. Reuben's gone, we know that. Simeon and Levi are gone. So now it's up to Judah. Judah's like the leader, because Reuben's already been disinherited from firstborn status. Simeon and Levi don't have an inheritance. Only Judah, he's the next guy. So he's prominent. So Judah's probably the one that arranged all of this. Okay, and we know he does because he gives the speech. We just don't know if he came up with the speech to give Jacob, but it's probably true that he did. So they bring the robe to Jacob, and they say, please identify this. Okay? Jacob, it's hopeless, which also makes all these boys feel really good, to say, I'm as good as dead. He puts sackcloth on his loins, and he basically says, I'm going to be in a state of death and mourning till my dying day. So imagine you being the other brothers and saying, hey, Dad, it's really awesome what you think about me. Like, all you care about. So the only thing that's a semblance of joy for him is Benjamin, okay, at this point. All right, so the narrative stops, and then it goes in Genesis 38 to Judah. And a lot of people say, this is so weird, you know, this is just like inserted story. Well, Judah is the one that just gave the speech, right? So Judah is the guy. So it turns to focus on Judah, okay? So Judah has just said, come let us sell. And so now we've got Judah and Tamar. Now, this is where the text is preparing you for Judah, okay? Now, guys, I might go a little bit over today, all right? But I promise it'll be worth it, okay? So he goes to Judah and focuses on him. All right. So let us now count the ways how awful Judah is. Are you ready? Okay. Yeah, get ready. All right, it starts out, Genesis 38. Who does Judah marry? A Canaanite. Do you remember what lengths Abraham went to not have Isaac marry a Canaanite? And Judah marries a Canaanite, and it says he took her and went into her. So Judah is just a beast of a guy, okay? So it's like the fall-ish stuff. Okay, so you got that. And then they have a son, him and this Canaanite woman. And their first son's name is okay? And I want to make sure, let's see. Yeah, is evil spelled backwards. Okay, so Ray, spelled backwards, is That's his first son's name. Okay, and God strikes down because he's wicked. It doesn't tell you what he did, but he's so wicked, God killed him. The last people God killed were the Sodomites. So this gives you a picture of what his firstborn son is. And who's supposed to be what you're like? Your firstborn son. So if is any reflection on Judah, what's Judah like? He's a bad dude, okay? So now had a wife. And the secondborn is supposed to do what for his older brother? Give Tamar, Er's wife's Tamar, he's supposed to give Tamar a child. Onan is supposed to give Tamar a child, but he doesn't. So Judah has to come to Onan and say, hey, go give your older brother a son and sleep with Tamar. Okay? So Judah has to make Onan do it. So Er's awful, and is Onan awful? Yeah, he's not doing his brotherly duty. Now, why wouldn't Onan do his brotherly duty? Here's why. Because who's firstborn now? Who's going to get the double portion of the inheritance? The oldest brother's dead. Onan's secondborn. So Onan has the firstborn status now. If he sleeps with Tamar, she will have a son, and they, in that culture, would generally name the offspring of the widow the name of her husband that died. So would have, be 2.0, okay? And then 2.0 would become firstborn status. So Onan's like, that can't happen. I want to be firstborn. But if I don't sleep with Tamar, my dad's going to get all judgy on me like he already did. So Onan starts sleeping with Tamar. But every time he's about to ejaculate, I'm not trying to be crass here, he removes himself and spills his seed on the ground. So catch this. Onan is sleeping repeatedly with Tamar, giving her hope that she's going to have a son, and pleasuring himself while not giving her a son. And this is Judah's secondborn, and he's not even killed yet. So what do you think was like? Onan's doing this and is still alive. So what was like? Worse than that. But then God says, enough, and he kills Onan too. Now, guess what Judah's thinking? He's thinking, I have two wicked sons, right? Absolutely not. He's thinking, it's this woman, Tamar. She's the reason my boys are dying. So he's got a thirdborn son, Shelah. And he says to Tamar, hey, Shelah's too young for you to sleep with, so I'll give him to you when he's older. And so Tamar waits, okay? Shelah grows up. He never gives her to Tamar. And Tamar sees that. She's around. She sees that Shelah's old enough to get me pregnant, and Judah's not giving me him. In this time, Judah's wife dies. His Canaanite wife dies. Tamar knows Judah, and she says to herself, if I dress up like a prostitute with his wife dead, he'll sleep with me. So she knows Judah's character. Is it a good character or a bad character? It's hard to get worse, okay? So she dresses up as a prostitute. Judah's going to the city with his buddy. Oh no, this is by himself at this point. He's going to the city. He sees the prostitute. He comes aside to her. He says, let me go into you. This is who Judah is. So he sleeps with Tamar. She's wearing, covered. He doesn't know it's her. But she says, before you can go into me, she says, I need your passport, I need your wallet, and I need your staff. That's essentially, I need your signet, your cord, and your staff. That's basically like your wallet, your passport, and your keys. I need that before. So he gives her his identity. And they sleep together. Tamar gets pregnant. And she says, you'll get these things back when you send me a goat. What did they use to deceive Jacob with Joseph's garments? A goat. A goat, okay? A goat's blood on Jacob's robe sends it. Okay. So Judah is satisfied. He does his business in the city. He goes back home. He gets the goat. He says to his buddy, hey, I had a little dealing with a prostitute near town, but I don't want to be embarrassed to go like give her the goat. So can you take this goat for me and go pay her off and bring me my wallet back? So his friend's like, sure. So his friend goes, he looks for the prostitute. There's no prostitute there. So he comes back to Judah and he says, hey, Judah, I couldn't find her. Here's your goat. And Judah says, let's just leave it here because I don't want to be shamefaced in front of the people. Okay? So time goes by. Someone comes to him and says, hey, Tamar, your daughter-in-law is pregnant. Now, if a girl got pregnant that was betrothed to somebody, that was adultery, and it was capital punishment. Okay? Now, Judah hears that, and because she's quote-unquote betrothed to Shelah, which he's never going to give her Shelah, so it's a total joke. But he says, let her be burned. Okay? Which is more than the worst way to die. Only that was reserved for the most heinous stuff. So she's to be burned. So she's walking out, pregnant, going to be burned, and she takes the signet, cord, and staff, and she says, hey, can you give these to Judah and tell him that it's by this man that I'm pregnant? Now, Judah didn't want to get shamefaced in front of the city, right? Well, guess what public executions were? Everybody came out. So everybody's around. Tamar's about to be walked out to be burned. And the messenger gives Judah, in front of everybody, is the way it reads, his wallet. And the person says, hey, whoever's these are, she says, is the guy. And there he is standing there, totally exposed in front of everybody for what he did. And what does he close with? She is more righteous than I. And why is that in Genesis 38? Because Judah's the one that just sold Joseph into slavery. But he's also the one that's blessed. And so God has to break him in order to use him the way he wants him to. And so this is Judah's breaking. He is getting shamefaced in front of everybody, and he acknowledges it. And he says plainly, she's more righteous than me. Now he finally stops thinking Tamar's the problem. And he finally realizes the problem's not out there. The problem's in here. And you'll find from this point on, Judah is a completely different man. This is Judah's breaking and remaking. And he'll become a very prominent character as we close out Genesis, which we should be able to do in the first few minutes tomorrow. Okay? But big thing. And this is exactly what God wants to do with each one of us and will do because he loves us. And that's just the start of these boys getting what they need for what they did to Joseph.